For this week in China and the world, we'll be discussing the impact and the history of the Confucian literati. Confucius, of course, is a historical figure. Confucius considered himself a transmitter of cultural values inherited from the Xie, Shang, and Zhou dynasties. Scholar officials, also known as literati, scholar gentlemen, and scholar bureaucrats, known as shidafu Chinese, were politicians and government officials appointed by the Emperor of China to perform day-to-day political duties from the Han Dynasty through the end of the Qing Dynasty. After the Sui Dynasty, these officials mostly came from the scholar gentry, the shenqi, who had earned academic degrees such as the Shuikai, Zhuren, or Jinshi degrees. They were earning these degrees by passing imperial examinations. So you could think of this as sort of a bachelor's, master's, and a PhD sort of structure. The concept of choosing bureaucrats by merit rather than birth started relatively early in Chinese history, sort of making Chinese culture a bit distinct in this way. But using written examinations as a tool of selection started in earnest during the mid-Tang Dynasty. The system then became dominant during the Song Dynasty and then lasted until it was abolished in the Qing Dynasty reforms of 1905. The content of narrow and fixed interpretations on texts of the Neo-Confucian orthodoxy is really what we're focusing on in terms of a period in this class. So it's not so much Confucianism as Neo-Confucianism. And this is an orthodoxy that is developed during the Ming Dynasty, during which the highest degree, the Jinshi, becomes the essential degree for the highest offices in the government. Songming Li Shui is Neo-Confucianism. It's a moral, ethical, and metaphysical Chinese school of thought influenced by Confucianism. So it is religious in a sense, and it's philosophical in a sense. I mean, most religious schools are philosophical, but it's not so much religious in the sense that it's like a separate Tao. It's like a school of thought in this sense, or a separate Jiao in Chinese. So those are the two terms that are used in Vietnamese and Chinese for separate schools or separate religions. But this is more like a sub-school of thought, of interpretation. So Neo-Confucianism originates with the works of Han Yu and Li Ao in the 8th and 9th centuries during the Tang Dynasty, and it becomes prominent during the Song and Ming dynasties under the formulations of Chu Shi. Although the Neo-Confucianists were critical of Taoism and Buddhism, the two did have an influence on the philosophy, and the Neo-Confucianists borrowed terms and concepts from Buddhism and Taoism alike. However, unlike Buddhism and Taoism, Confucianists and Neo-Confucianists especially saw metaphysics as a catalyst for spiritual development, religious enlightenment, and also a catalyst for either being moral or immoral. The Neo-Confucianists essentially used metaphysics as a guidance for developing a rationalist ethical philosophy of how the universe worked, how the world worked. In 1070, the Vietnamese Emperor Li Tong opened the first Confucian University in Hanoi named Văn Mieu, and this is a turning point. We're talking about the Ming Dynasty, we're talking up through the 15th century, but in the 11th century we see this sort of turning point in the emergence of early Neo-Confucianism in Vietnam as well. The Li and Chun courts expanded Confucianism and its Neo-Confucian influences in Vietnamese Mandarin through the use of Chinese-style examinations. They continued the model of the Tang dynasty until being partially annexed by Ming invaders in 1407, causing a shift towards sort of Ming styles. That being said, the Vietnamese quickly threw off the Ming invaders, and then in 1460, Emperor Lê Thánh Tông of the Lê dynasty adopted the Ming-style Neo-Confucianism as Dai Viet's basic virtues and the center of Vietnamese sort of organization of government. The portrait here is not of a Chinese person, it's actually a Vietnamese person. It's a portrait of Chu Van An, who lived from 1292 to 1370 and was a prominent Vietnamese teacher of Neo-Confucianism in the 14th century. So given the influence of Chinese Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism on certain schools of Vietnamese thought, the question I'd like you to discuss for this post is, how could that be important and why? How could that influence on Vietnamese trajectories of thought be important for our understanding of China in the world and why?